Chapter 11 Coexistence. Her ears were ringing, the sounds of explosions, barely audible as if miles and miles away, echoed slowly through her brain. She felt lightheaded. Her stomach was churning. She lay in a pool of both blood and vomit. Her throat sung and was dry and hoarse as she pushed herself up onto shaky arms. Mama, she called, coughing and dry heaving immediately afterward. All around her was chaos. To and from, the people of her village sprinted in all directions. Some clung to their children, some clung to their belongings, some held on to nothing but continued running for their lives. As her head began to clear and the ringing calmed, all at once, the world came back to normality. Gunshots, explosions, and shouting were all she heard as she looked left and right. She looked down at her hands. They were so small, those of a child. But how? Looking up, she saw her mother at last, and her aunt, who was her mother's twins. Together, they held weapons and crouched behind covers while firing at the invaders. Mama, she called again. She rushed to her feet and began running. Her mother, hearing the sound of her child's voice, looked back. No, Eileen, stay back, she cried. Little Lin Chan's hands were grabbed from behind and she was pulled to a nearby building. Looking at the one who grabbed her, it was her twin sister, Ling. It's okay, Eileen. It'll be alright, Ling urged, gently cupping Eileen's cheek in her hands. Eileen cupped Ling's back, and they pressed their foreheads together for comfort as the sounds of war continued to rage outside. The sounds of a chopper arriving on the scene, followed by more gunfire, had the girls crying out in terror while hugging each other for dear life. And finally, all went quiet. The girls slowly looked up at each other and then to the door again. Beneath it, the sunlight was blocked by a shadow. The doorknob began to twist, and then the door was opened. Slowly, the wood creaked as the girls' hand gripped more tightly as they pressed themselves against the back of the wall. And into the room walked a tall, dignified man of Japanese descent. He looked around and spotted the girl in the corners. Slowly, he approached and knelt down, extending a hand to them. Don't be afraid, he whispered calmly. His voice was deep, powerful, yet calming all at once. Both girls could feel the other's heart beat slowing, and they looked at one another before standing up and reaching for him. He waited patiently as they placed their hands in his, and he walked them outside to see that their village, though a little worse for wear, had been saved. The invaders were gone, and the people were gathering the wounded for treatment. The girl's mother spotted them and gasped. Ling! Eileen! She cried. She ran to her daughters and embraced them both tightly, crying happiness that they were all right and had managed to keep each other safe. The girls cried into the mother's shoulder, and the tall gentleman watched with quiet satisfaction at seeing them reunite. As they calmed, they looked up at him. Who are you? The mother asked. My name is Ishiro Sarisawa. It's nice to meet you, he said with a smile. Little Eileen looked up in wonder at the symbol of his jacket, a kind of sideways hourglass of sort, stylized with a sharp corners instead of curves. And, in a way, they reminded her of the wings of... Ha! Eileen gasped as she awoke in a cold sweat. Her heart was racing, her body moist and cold to the touch. She gripped her bare arms as she caught her breath and sighed. There's 10 nights in a row now. Why is this memory recurring so often? She groaned. The phone beside her bed rang, startling her, and the caller's ID revealed it was her sister. Ling? Eileen, are you alright? Ling asked. Yes, but it happened again, right? You relieved the day he saved us too, didn't you? Yeah? What could it mean? I don't know, Ling. Well, just be careful, Eileen. I hesitate to guess what such frequently recurring dreams could mean for us. You too, Ling. We'll talk again soon. Ending the call and putting her phone down, Eileen took a deep breath and looked at a picture nearby herself and Ling, standing beside Dr. Sarisawa. The picture was only a few years old, yet both of them still looked so small compared to him, like a pair of fairies beside a human. The thought brought a smile back to her face as she dressed herself and made her way towards the bridge of the Argo. Meanwhile, Mark had awoken from a nightmare as well. He had once again relived the night of the San Francisco attack by Godzilla and the Mutos. The dreams was the same as before. The house crushed beneath Godzilla's foot as all hopes of finding Andrews were crushed along with it. Shaking it off and getting dressed, Mark looked out of his window at the cloud floating by beneath the Argo's wing. On the bridge, Foster has gathered the others to discuss what happened. Anything from a satellite? She asked. Subs have Godzilla hauling ass off Argentina, and we have lost Monster Zero in the tropical storm over Brazil. We're scanning the entire southern hemisphere for him now, but so far, nothing, Rick replied. Then scan the northern too, Foster demanded. Yeah, okay, yeah, Rick said, somewhat irritated. Dr. Chen arrived and was greeted by Zarasawa and Graham, who were deep in the discussion about Monster Zero's and Godzilla's battle. The primary subject of conversation was how Monster Zero could fight so well after spending thousands of years suspended animation with no food or feel of any kind. I know what I saw, and I'm telling you, Sam, she pressed the button, Foster said. All due respect, Colonel, you're so wrong. Maybe she wouldn't have done that. Christ, she recruited pretty much everyone in this room who's not top level staff yet, Sam argued. Maybe Jonah Foster, right? Maybe used medicine as leverage, Rick asked. No. It has to be something else, Sam said. Emma, Mark said, arriving on the bridge. Everyone's eyes turned towards him. It was Emma, he said, his voice soft and low. Foster nodded slowly as Sam continued to shake his head in disbelief. Nobody forced her. She picked it up, looked me in the eyes, and said, Run. Then she pressed it. Mark finished. So first, she released Mothra, and then Monster Zero. Is anyone else seeing a pattern beginning to emerge? Foster asked. Yes, another good one. It is as if she's trying to start a mass awakening, Aline said. Well, it's too bad nobody tried to warn you that was gonna happen, Mark said, taking a few steps towards her as she glared silent daggers back at him. Hang on. Why the hell would she want to release them? Why would she team up with Jonah of all people to do it? Sam asked. We'll ask her when we find her, Sarisawa replied, fixing his glasses. So let's keep looking. Everyone nodded silently, save Dr. Graham, who sat down and exhaled a deep breath. You alright? Sarisawa asked, taking a seat next to her. I am alright. It was the closest thing I have ever come to dying. When I looked into Monster Zero's eyes, I just froze, she said with a subtle quiver in her voice. Sarazawa put a hand on her shoulder and giving her a reassuring shake before standing up and approaching Mark, you were brought here to help us track these creatures because of your experience with animals and their behavior. So I want to hear your thoughts on where Monster Zero might be headed, he said. Mark took a deep breath. If I'm gonna track him, I need to know more about him. The pictures you showed me were nice and all, but they didn't tell me anything about where he may have nested or spent most of his time. And without knowing what his primary territory was, I can't tell you much more than you already know, he said. Dr. Stanton, Sarisawa said. Sure, here, Rick replied, putting an image on the table monitor of a map of the world. What am I looking at? Marx asked. You're looking for Monster Zero's unknown territory, Rick replied. There's nothing there, Mark countered. Exactly, 'cause we don't know where his territory was, Rick finished. All we know about Monster Zero is that it just appeared, for lack of a better word, in the Antarctic ice thousands of years ago. Its body was covered with small burns and scratches likely from an old conflict with Godzilla, but that's all, Dr. Graham stated, finally raising out of a chair. There has to be more than just that, Mark said angrily. Didn't you bore into the ice to retrieve sample? He asked. Yes, but our drilling returned next to nothing, Sarasara replied flatly. What? Next to nothing? What was the little bit you did find? Mark asked. The only sample we recovered from a tiny piece of one of his scales near the follicles of his claw was a tiny sample of a meteor fragment, Sarisawa replied. So what? Did he nest near a meteor impact craters? Was he hit by one? Fell into a ditch with one? Did he fall into the ice near him and get stuck on him on how somehow? Mark asked. We don't know. We find it near the follicles of his claw. That's all, Sarisawa replied flatly. Well, sorry, Sarisawa, but that's not really helping me here, Mark said, shaking his head slightly. Sarisawa nodded and took a deep breath as he ran a hand through his hair. Mark, can you give us anything about Monster Zero based on his appearance? Aline asked. Bring up a scanned 3D image of the creature on the table monitor. Mark walked closer and circled the table, taking mental notes of everything he saw. Well, it's reptilian in nature, but I don't think it's cold-blooded like most reptiles we know, Mark said. Why is that? Rick asked. Animals that are cold-blooded can't regulate their own body temperature, so when they're in the cold weathers, they get sluggish and lethargic. But we saw both this thing and Godzilla fighting and moving like normal, so I'm guessing that they are both warm-blooded creatures who can regulate their own temperature. This means that they could both survive almost anywhere on the planet, regardless of temperature, climate, or any other living condition other animals can't handle, Mark stated. So what does that mean for us? Sam asked. It means we're in a rough ride. That Monster Zero thing, big as it is going to need food or fuel at some point after waking up from hibernation. So we're likely to see it seek out a source of energy, and given that you labeled it bioelectric, I'm guessing it's likely to head for heavily residential areas where we have multiple power generators lying around to suck energies from. Mike replied. No, this day just keeps getting better, Rick stated sarcastically. Dr. Chan, do you think you can dig up those photos from your family's archives again? Maybe I can pick up on something if I look at them again, Mark asked. Eileen smiled. Sure, she replied, leaving the room to fetch her tablet. Heads up, everyone. Godzilla appears to be following the same path as Emma's Osprey, heading north over and around South America to here. Outpost 56 on Isla de Mera in Mexico. We'll be there in about 10 minutes, Foster announced. What about the people? Mark asked. Excuse me? Foster replied. The people down in that village. If whatever is in that mountain awakens, then those people are gonna be the special of the day, Mark said forcefully. We have sent G-Team to begin evacuation, Sarizawa replied. Doctor, we have a call from Isa Dimara, a comms officer announced. Urgent call, Sarizawa replied. And then on the main screen appeared the face of Emma Rushaw sitting calmly watching her screen as she scanned everyone's face. I suppose I should go first, Emma said quietly. Where's Madison? Mark demanded. She's right here with. Dad, are you okay? Madison asked frantically. I'm fine, Maddie. You alright, honey? He asked. Yeah, and Dad? She began. What is it, Maddie? I'm sorry, she whispered. You don't need to be, honey. It's okay, he replied. She's fine, Mark. Trust me, Emma replied. Trust is a little hard to provide given what you pulled out there, Dr. Russell, Foster barked. I know, and I can only imagine what you're thinking. But if there were any other ways to do this, then I would, Emma replied. Do what, Emma? Mark asked through grit teeth. I'm saving the world, Mark. Just like I always. Saving it? How? By releasing those things? That doesn't make any sense, he yelled. As impossible as it seems, it does, Mark. So hear me out, please, she said quietly. Mark's mouth shut and lips sealed tight. This better be good, Emma, he growled. After we lost Andrew, I swore his death wouldn't be in vain and that I would find an answer, a solution to why the Titans were rising, so I could stop them from creating another San Francisco event. But as I dug deeper, I started to realize that they were here for a reason. And what reason is that? Mark demanded. Mark, if there is a God out there, these creatures are its first children. Human beings have only been here for a handful of thousands of years, a blink of an eye compared to how long some of these titans have been here. But look at the differences between them. The titans were part of the natural order, but humans, we have seen fit to put ourselves above the natural order. We create concrete roads and buildings over the grass and dirt, depriving the world of a chance for life beneath every square inch of what we call civilization. We've begun reaching an overpopulated state where our ability to produce goods to sustain our existence will soon be exhausted and yields diminishing returns. We are driving other species to extinction in the name of our expansion. We kill one another using bombs that destroy landscapes and other innocent creatures that have no say in the matter. We produce pollution, which slaughters dozens of species every decade on its own due to the inability to adapt to the dropping air quality. Don't you see? We're killing Mother Nature and this planet for our own personal gain. And everywhere you look, everyone seems perfectly content in the idea that it doesn't matter. That will that will be fine no matter how far we push. And worst of all, they are content in the idea that nature deserves nothing in return for all we're doing to her. Emma took a deep breath, and it was obvious how strained it was that she was fighting back tears of frustration. She blinked away the moisture and continued. Like all living things, Mother Nature and the Earth released a fever to fight the infection that humanity has become, and that fever, or rather, that cure, is the Titans. Mark shook his head. Mark, don't you see? The Titans are and have always been part of that natural order, and Mother Nature's only real way of defending herself from us and the power we have created bombs, pesticides, guns, nukes. The Titan are all she has. If we take them away from her, then this planet will perish, and so will we. Mark took a breath and ran a hand through his hair. Mark, look. I know this sounds impossible, that it sounds crazy, but it's not. Just look at this, Emma said, screen sharing several images and time lapses of sequences of destroyed cities which, after the Titans passing through, have begun rejuvenating nature. Look, Mark, just like how a forest fire fertilizes the soil, how a volcano creates a new land, we've seen signs that these creatures will ultimately do the same. Everywhere they go, destruction of our civilization ensures, but is followed by the revitalization of nature and life. San Francisco and Las Vegas in the 5 short years have been overgrown with new plant life, and numerous animal species are now calling it home where they never could before due to our presence, she continued. Enough, Emma, Mark yelled. Emma was taken aback by his outburst. You say they're helping this planet, but who are you to decide that this is what's right? That killing off humanity city by city is justified. Because if one person or even a singular group of people like Jonah and his flowcase are allowed to wield the orca to make this a reality, where's the justice for the rest of humanity? Where's the justice or fairness for those who don't know what's happening? He argued. Emma took a breath. Killing off humanity so the Titans can regrow nature afterward isn't saving the world, Emma. It's not balance either. It's genocide. Plain and simple, he growled. Emma shook her head quietly. Mark, I thought you of all people would be able to see where I'm coming from. We spent years working on the Arga so we could protect life, but now I'm actually taking more proactive measure to do that on a grand scale. You're calling it genocide. What else can I call it, Emma? He yelled back. What about coexistence? She yelled back. Serizawa sat up a tiny bit straighter, holding his breath. The Orca isn't just a tool to wake up these Titans up and let them run free. You of all people should know that. Using Godzilla's alpha frequency alone is capable of calming other Titans and repelling them from certain areas, or even sometimes pacifying them so we can get closer. Mothra is proof of that. You can ask Madison if you need to about that, Emma cried, her eyes welling once again. Humanity can coexist with them, Mark, but we must set them free. We must. They can replenish and revitalize this world. Yes, we might have to make sacrifice, but isn't that what compromise is, Mark? Coming to the mutual understanding and sometimes sacrificing something personal so that everyone can feel like they're being treated fairly, she said through ragged breaths. It's possible, Mark. It's possible. Humanities and the Titans aren't in a war here. Not unless you listen to the governments who wants them destroyed. Out of fear and ignorance. The Titans are here as another set of species we need to understand to and live alongside. Just look at Godzilla. He lives in the sea. As long as we leave him alone, he leaves us alone, she pleaded. Finally, she put her face in her hand and sobbed. Her tears leaked through her fingers to the table, and all aboard the Argo fell silent, even Mark, who sat down in a chair. And when Emma composed herself, she wiped her tears away and looked at the camera with determination. I am doing this for all of us, Mark, especially Andrew. He's gone. Nothing will change that. Our baby boy is gone. But I can. We. We can create a world that he would be proud of. Together, she said quietly. Mark let out a deep breath through his nose and stood up, glaring at the screen. Emma, just stop. Andrew never saw the Titan until it was too late, and he died before he could make a choice or tell us what he'd want. So, how do you know this is right by him? Mark asked calmly, but with authority. Emma's lower lip quivered as she struggled for an answer. Mark, sniff. I argue all of you to seek refuge. I started on this path, and I'm going to see it through, she said calmly. Mark grit his teeth and looked down and away, as he knew that face she was making. Take care, all of you. Coexistence is possible, but we need to let nature make its statement before we can take the step needed to make it so. With that, she cut the feed and sunk back into a chair with a deep and heavy breath. Madison, standing nearby, slack-jawed, could only take a sharp and short breath as she fought to maintain her own composure. And as Emma looked to Maddie, she offered a weak smile. It's okay, honey. It'll be okay, honey. I promise. I know that some of that sounds bad, but it's the best thing for all of us, she said calmly. How do I know that? Maddie asked. Emma faltered. Because, she stuttered. What if Dad's right? What if was a mistake? Maddie asked. It's not, Maddie, Emma replied softly. How do you know? Maddie screamed before darting away to her quarters. Emma let out a sigh, her hands supporting herself on the table as she swept her bangs out of her face. It'll be okay, Maddie, I promise. It'll be okay, she whispered to herself. Back on the Argo, everyone's attention turned to an alarm. Oh boy. She shut down the containment system, Rick said as an live feed of Isla de Mara appeared with a red ring around it. In the bunker she'd broadcast from, Emma breathed heavily as Jonah's men prepared for the next phase. Doctor? Jonah said quietly. Emma looked at him slowly. Are you ready? He asked. She nodded and walked over towards the Orca. You're right, he said calmly. She glanced up at him. This is the way, he added, looking up at the screen showing Isla de Mara. Changes is never easy, and after times it comes with pain, he said. In his mind, An echoing chorus of screams and the sounds of war rang incoherently like a cacophony of death. The last thing he heard was the word "Papa" before a single gunshot brought all the sound to a grinding halt. Opening his eyes and letting out a breath, he nodded quietly at Emma. Do this, and only some will die. Don't do it, and everything will die along before long, he whispered, placing a hand on her shoulder. This is the only way, Emma. Activate the Orca. Help the world take it another step towards balance, he urged, removing his hand and backing a step away. Emma looked at the Orca and placed her finger over the touch panel, hesitating for but a moment. Emma took a deep breath and tapped the screen, activating the pulse to awaken the slumbering behemoth within the volcano. Chapter 12. The Fire Demon. Below the shadow of the volcano, the city's sirens blared as the evacuation ensued, but mass panic was inevitable. The streets were littered with thousands upon thousands of people all scrambling to reach the chopper and boats leading off the island. At the choppers, capacity were being rapidly reached. Tell them to slow it down and stand back. Repeat, stand back, Burns ordered to a man with a megaphone speaking Spanish to translate the orders. Behind a dashing crowd, and above the building rooftops, small pillars of smoke from the volcano emerged, and following this pillar of smoke, a slightly muffled but still audible shriek like nothing any of them had ever heard before pierced the heavens. The orca's pulse began reverberating, pushing out through the speaker atop the volcano's containment barrier. It cuts through the silence of the world below as the containment barrier slid was smashed by something beneath it and sent flying into the air with a fiery explosion. And, along with it, a massive plume of smoke and ash emerged and filled the sky like a black mushroom cloud. Atop the volcano, Monarch Station soldiers ran to and from to the battle station as the massive claw emerged, and three long, sharp claws dug into the metallic platform. Shortly after, two massive horns emerged from the fires, and a head still covered in lava was soon to follow. And as the soldiers beheld the reptilian avian rise, two glowing orange eyes snapped open, people dilating against the sun's light as it shook its head, throwing small spurts of lava across all the platform. One of them struck a soldier, who quickly began burning alive beneath it as his friend attempted to desperately and in vain to free him from his molten death trap. To the people below, it was like watching the winged form of Satan himself emerging from the fires of hell. The creature spread its enormous wing and roared, splitting the skies with a concussive burst of power from the force of the roar alone, which scattered the inhabitants in all directions. The screaming and alarms below caught its attention as its eyes began to adjusting to the light of day for the first time and who knew how long. What do you call this one? Mark asked. Local legends call it Rodan, the fire demon, Eileen replied. Well, that's comforting, Mark replied sarcastically. Rodan released another roar, catching all of their attention, but that's not all it did. In the Atlantic Ocean, racing through the northwestern tip of South America, Godzilla's head snaps up slightly, hearing the call. Godzilla increased his speed and breached his head above the water and unleashed an earth-shattering roar, which sent a concussive burst even larger than that Rodan had produced through the air. Back at the mountain, Rodan sat and waited patiently. Then it hit. The remnant of the concussive wave released by Godzilla arrived and struck Rodan's chest. The flying demon turned towards the source of the burst, and his throat he began clicking, growling. Guys, you know that storm we have lost, Monster Zero? Is changing direction and, yes, it's where it's headed, Sam stated urgently. That's impossible. No storm can turn and move that fast, Rick retorted. Wait, Aline said, closing her eyes. What is it, Dr. Chen? Dr. Graham asked. A moment of silence passed. I don't think it's a storm, Lin said at last. Sarisawa, you got a satellite up there, right? Have one of them take a picture of the center of the thing now, Mark ordered. Sarisawa nodded and picked up the phone. A moment later, following his call, he hung up and they waited. Got it. Bring it up now, Rick said. On the main monitor emerged a picture of Monster Zero, partially hidden in the haze at the center, moving towards Rodan. No way, Rick said in disbelief. We need time to finish the evacuation, Serizawa ordered. Well then, you better hurry, cause it's closing in fast, Rick said. Serizawa, it's no coincidence that Monster Zero is heading this way. It's reacting to the big bird's cries. That means it's either coming for a meal or it's coming to settle a territorial disagreement, Mark said. What do you suggest? Serizawa asked. Rodan, meanwhile, was hit by another wave from the south. A second calling from Godzilla forced him to shake his head a bit and stop clicking. He unleashed another ear-splitting roar of his own, sending a wave back. And a few seconds out to sea, Godzilla felt the core and increased his speed yet again. His spine split the water fast enough to produce a misty spray several hundred meters in length behind him as he continued to tear through the water. Back at the volcano, the fighter jets escorting the Argo began circling around towards Rodan and unleashed a barrage of missiles onto his chest and neck. Rodan roared in irritation as his eyes began trailing the fighter that raced past him. And then he spied the Argo. His beak opened partially, and the brow-like ridge above his eyes dipped down in an unmistakable display of aggression. Oh, I think we got its attention, Mark stated. Everyone strap in. All ships, follow our lead, Mahosta ordered. The Argo's main engine burst to life as it begins a sharp turn away from Rhoda, who watched it like a hawk before spreading his wing and taking his first step in millennium towards the edge of the volcano. And with a single beat of his mighty wings, he was airborne and gliding down towards the city below. Due to his size and the pressure generated by his wings, Roland's flight path above the city produced a trailing wave of hurricane force wind, escorted by searing heat from his biovolcanic respiratory system. Wave after wave of explosion bursts off buildings, suddenly being torn apart by the air pressure rippled through the city, and those unlucky enough to be caught beneath his path were sucked into the air and thrown for hundreds, if not thousands of meters from where they were first lifted. For some, death was swift and came as a result of the G-force of the lift-off. For others, it was a long way back to Earth. The Argo burst through the cloud, aiming to seek temporary refuge from Rodan as they contacted the fighter. Argo to Gold Squadron. Let's lure this turkey away from the mainland straight into the path of Monster Zero. ETA 2 minutes, Rick called. Gold Squadron. Engage on our 6, Foster added. Copy. Start the dock, Gold Squadron leader replied. The fighter all arsed up and around, heading back towards Rodan, who had appeared above the clouds about 2 miles from them. As they launched the first wave of missiles at him, Rodan was struck and roared in challenge. As they approached a collision, Rodan flapped his wings and downward, and the wind force destroying 2 fighter jets and propelling himself skyward for hundreds of meters. Now far above his brain, he lined himself up. Bogey, 9 o'clock, high, a pilot shouted out as Rodan began a dive. Racing by and beneath the upper layers of the fighters, he soared at a rapid clip and grabbed hold of 2 fighters with his talon before biting the ships into oblivion. And he lifted his head. He was a bit too close to the water for comfort, and the tip of his wing grazed the water surface as he angled them back to begin another ascent after the Argo. Duster 223, get out of there. He's on the tail. Get out of there, Foster called. Besides Rodan was another chopper, which had begun unloading a stream of Gatling bullets onto the side of his head. But the enemy might as well have been fleas with the lack of their attention. Rodan gave them as he chased down Duster 223 with a gaping maw. The pilot ejected, only to be caught into Rodan's mouth as the reading went flatline. ETA to Monster Zero. 60 seconds, Rick called. Raptor 37. Bogey on the 6. Watch it, a pilot called. Suddenly, Rodan began spinning in mid-air. His wing came around and slammed into each fighter jet caught within the enormous width. Explosion after explosion erupted in the air in a dazzling display of power, grace, and intellect, as Rodan's flight path seemed to follow the gathered planes as they tried to escape, and at last, the last plane fell. Rodan's claws skimmed the surface of the ocean before slammed his wings down and propelled himself skyward towards the now defenseless Argo. We lost the squadron. ETA to Monster Zero, 30 seconds, Rick shouted. We won't make it in time, Sam added. Shut up, Sam, Eileen barked. Hang on, everyone, Foster ordered. The Argo fired its final waves of afterburners, reaching the top speed it was capable of reaching, but behind it, Rodan was catching up fast. Rising higher and higher, Rodan began a dive, and as he raced downward, the Argo faced upwards, causing him arched, arched upwards, causing him to sail past. The pressure wave of his passing rocked the vessel, but they continued on towards Monster Zero as Rodan steadied himself. And then Rodan's head snapped towards the south away from the storm. With a flap of his wing, he veered off course and in that direction. Where is he going? Mark shouted. I don't know, but at least he's not, Rick stated. He was stopped by a sudden surge of electricity striking the Argo as everyone's attention went forward. The enormous form of Monster Zero appeared in the field of view. Dive! Dive! Foster shouted. The Argo began descending rapidly as Monster Zero spotted Rodan and began to dive towards him. And with Rodan's attention fixated on something else, Rodan easily managed to catch up to and surprise him as his claws dug into Rodan's side, resulting in a high-pitched shriek of agony from the fire demon. Sensei, what happened? Why'd Rodan stop following us? Dr. Graham asked. Sarasara shook his head. Look, Rick shouted, bringing up a satellite image on the screen of a blue flashing light in the ocean rapidly heading the way. Gojira da, Sarisawa whispered with a slight smirk. All's right. Big G's coming to town zero, Rick shouted with a pumping fist. You'd think he'd be coming for Rodan or Monster Zero, Sam asked. Hopefully both. But hell, at this point, I'm rooting for him to take out all the other titans, so it's just him. At least we know he's gonna be chill in the ocean away from humanity, right? He added. Mark, what do you think? Toasted Turkey over there looked towards where Godzilla's coming from, just before veering off the chase. I'm guessing Godzilla must have caught his attention somehow. Maybe a roar or a low-pitched frequency that we can't hear, but it could feel. It's not uncommon in the animal kingdom, but as for whether or not he's coming to help or take them both out, I don't know, Mark said. Sarasara nodded that as their attention was grabbed by the force of the Argo levering out from its dive to escape Monster Zero. Mayday, Mayday, this is Raptor 1 to Argo. Do you read? Barnes' voice came on the radio. Copy, Raptor 1. What's your status? Foster replied. We're screwed. That's what. And we got CVs on board. We're gonna need immediate mid-air retrieval, Barnes relayed. Lock onto that position and prepare the hangars for emergency landing, Foster ordered. Hangar doors are unresponsive, Rick replied. Man, you override, she asked. They're stuck, Rick retorted. Mark groaned and got out of his seat and turned towards the back of the room. Which way? The hangars? He asked. It's, I know that way. Stamp stuttered. Hope you got a big wrench, Rick called after the team. Meanwhile, Rodan fought for his life against the much larger Monster Zero. Having managed to shake off the first attack, Rodan circled around and prepared for a strike with his claw. But Monster Zero's superior leg length allowed his claw to grapple Rodan's stomach and thigh first, pushing his lower body back as the two outer head grabbed for hold of his wings in the mouth while the third raced forward and bit into his shoulder. Rodan screeched in pain and began pecking desperately at the neck of the center head as best as he could. Thankfully, the curvature of his beak allowed him to get some good digs in, and the previously pristine golden hue started leaking a dark reddish brown fluid as the center head let go and shook off the pain. Rodan then turned his head and shrieked at the left head as loudly as he could, sending an air pressure wave straight into it, which immediately forced it to let go. With ears ringing and its thoughts scrambled, the head shook violently, trying to regain its senses as Rodan turned the other way and rammed his beak into the base of the jaw of the right head. Squirting reddish-brown blood, the right head let go with a cry of pain as Monster Zero's feet let go of Rodan's body. Flapping his wing to propel himself upward, he turned quickly and began a dive bomb onto the back of Monster Zero, latching onto the musculature in between his wings with talons sinking deep into his flesh. Monster Zero's free head shrieked in agony as more reddish-brown blood spurted free of its body, and all three turned 180 degrees and snarled at Rodan, who snarled, and roared back in defiance. Back in the Argo, Mark and Sam reached the hangar. "What's wrong?" Mark shouted. "Hydraulic system are jammed. I'm trying to jump-start power, but it's not looking good," a soldier said. Back on the bridge, a beeping alert came over the comms. "It's Amaro Stans," Rick said, obviously disheartened. Stan's face appeared on the main screen. "Admiral Sarisara said. Dr. Sarisara, Colonel Foster, I need you and your force to immediately disengage and withdraw to a safe distance," Stans ordered. "Admiral, I don't understand," Foster replied. "We've been developing a prototype for a new weapon codenamed the Oxygen Destroyer. It does exactly what its name implies by activating a deadly chemical reaction in the air and in the water, which destabilizes and destroys all oxygen molecules within a 2-mile radius of the blast site. And since all life form in this world needs oxygen in one form or another, with any luck, we'll kill these things and the nightmare will finally be over," he stated. "Admiral, we must keep our faith in Gojira," Sarisava begged. "I am sorry, Doctor, but you had a chance. The missile is already on its way. May God have mercy on us all. Stands out," he said, cutting the feed. "He's not lying," Foster said, looking at the monsters tracking the inbound missile. "It's coming in hot. Argo, you gotta get those bay doors open now. Have the crash and fire crew ready," Martins shouted. On board the Argo in the hangar, Merc spied a weakly attached Osprey dangling above the bay doors. Looking down, he spied the button to release that and pressed it. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" the soldier manning the station shouted. With a final pull of the final release lever, the Osprey fell through the bay door, forcing them open. The falling Osprey just barely missed the oncoming Raptor 1 chopper, which began its descent and prepared for an emergency landing inside the hangar. Everyone inside, meanwhile, scrambled for the exit as the chopper raced forward. Finally, the moment of truth. The chopper entered the hangar and crashed into the railing. The chopper spun and twisted around and around, its blades being smashed off by anything and everything in their way, with enough durability to withstand pushback. But at last it came to a stop, and miraculously, nobody was seriously injured. A few people have been roughed up or scared shitless, but they were alive. Outside, things weren't going so well. Rodan, despite his best and most heroic effort, was outclassed. Monster Zero's free head were all clamped around his throat and dragging his surface against the surface of the ocean. Small red rivers ran from Rodan's throat as he choked and gagged, fighting desperately for breath. Finally, Monster Zero unleashed his lightning blast into Rodan's body, throwing him down into the water with a tremendous force. Upon impact, steam erupted in a massive wall, clouding Monster Zero as he flapped his wings to remain in place and watch as Rodan's body sink into the gloom. However, the right head, distracted by a familiar sound, looked out towards the open sea and spotted the Argo. Chapter 13. A Queen Emerges. The heavens shook violently as the Argo succumbed to a pressure wave generated by the flaps of Monster Zero's mighty wing. A single flap was all it took to propel the Leviathan forward towards the Argo, as its now only enemy in the skies. Each subsequent flat as its body neared the water beats the ocean back as if it was scared to make contact with the beast. As Mark and the others watched the the coming of this ancient wickedness, they couldn't help but feel in their hearts that the end has come. Oh God, Mark whispered. However, just as Monster Zero reached the Argo and was about to destroy it in its powerful jaws, a familiar roar was heard as Godzilla breached out of the water like a giant whale, grabbing the right head's neck in his jaws and dragging Monster Zero down into the ocean. Mark's face shifted from acceptance to shock as he was pulled back by one of the soldiers before he would have inevitably slid out of the Argo's open door to his death. Now in safety, they all retreated to the bridge as the Argo flew at top speed while continuing to track the oncoming oxygen destroyer. Down the water below, Monster Zero's massive wings proved to be his greatest disadvantages. With such massive surface area, they generated so much drag. It's almost impossible to move them through the water at all. Godzilla, meanwhile, cut through the water like butter, circling Monster Zero and grappling him while keeping him under like a crocodile does to its helpless victims. As the Argos began to retreat in earnest, they looked back at the disturbance of the water to see Godzilla's spine cutting the surface and continue to circle around like a series of shark fin in a feeding frenzy. We're getting out of here. The military's weapon is getting close, Rick said. But it's not the worst news I heard today, Mark replied. In the water, Godzilla continued circling and dragging Monster Zero down into the depths, while pulling hard against the rightmost head, now caught in his jaws. Oxygen destroyer incoming, and we just cleared the blast zone, Rick announced. How long till it hits? Foster asked. 10 more seconds, Rick replied. Godzilla circling and tugging finally pushed the rightmost head to its limits, and as Godzilla gripped the neck with his powerful claws and yanked hard to the left, the head snapped off in his jaws and it instantly went limp, with brown and red blood pouring profusely from the wounds as a light high in the sky began to grow brighter and brighter. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The missiles pierced the water surfaces, and a muffled explosion followed by a massive orb of green light erupted from the gloom and illuminated the sky as if it were the sun. For several long seconds, the sounds were sapped from the world, and as the light faded, a mushroom cloud appeared over the blast zone in the water. This was all followed by a massive concussive shockwave which shook the Argo violently in the skies beyond. Once the Argo had settled, all went quiet. Down in the waters below, fish began floating belly up by the hundreds of thousands, and the ocean had gone still as a stone. Holy Mother of God, Rick whispered as the feeds came through. Serizawas and all the others all stared in their shock at just how quiet the world has become. But suddenly, from beneath the water, a large dark shape began to grow. Everyone leaned forward to its defeat, and hearts racing, as the shape grew bigger and larger. However, bursting free of the dead ocean was Monster Zero. Breaking the surface, his wing finally gained the lift needed to propel him out of the water and into the air he called home, as the two remaining heads roared with a mixture of determination and pain from the battle. Dr. Stanton, can you locate Gojira? Sarasawa demanded. Yeah, I got something, Rick replied. Godzilla's heart rate played through the speaker as the signals came through. His vitals are fading. Radiation levels plummeting, he said, his voice slower and less lively than before. The pulse of Godzilla's heart slowed with each successive beat, and the sound of the microphone picked up of his weakened growls as also begins to fade. Come on, big guy, fight it, Rick urged quietly. One final beat, and Godzilla's heart was followed by the ring of flatline reading. Rick took off his headphone, turning towards the other as he suddenly shook his head. Serizawa's head lowered and his stability faltered as he nearly toppled over in disbelief. Dr. Graham put a hand on his back to stabilize him, helping him to a chair as he leaned back and removed his glasses. Eileen moved closer to him as well, putting her hands on one of his to offer whatever comfort she could as he fought to regain his breath. Mark stared at the flatline reading, but as far as he did so, he didn't feel the satisfaction he thought he would want for these last 5 years. Instead, it was more of a feeling of defeat. Looks like you got your wish, Mark, Serizawa finally said, still struggling to breathe properly. Sensei, let's go. You need to get some rest, Dr. Graham stated as she took one arm and Elaine took the others to help walk him to his quarters. Mark looked back to the monitors where Godzilla's flatlined vitals, and he felt his stomach drop as a wave of confusion and nausea overtook him. All around him, everyone's face had darkened. The light of the world outside had dimmed as the sun began to set, and the world itself seemed to cry as the rainstorm began gathering in the skies all over the Argo, pelting its window and forward view pane with droplets of water. Monster Zero, meanwhile, landed on the Isla de Mara volcano, no gushing lava down its slope. As it did, the center head looked at the right stump and noticed a thin plastic-like covering with something happening beneath it, something wriggling, growing, like a tongue flipping and lashing out in all directions, biting the cover and tearing it away. The sickening sight of Monster Zero's right head regrowing by the second filled the Argos monitor feeds. Several on the vessels covered the mouth or looked away until at last the head regrew completely and joined the other two in a roar of unified triumph to the heavens above. As the call reverberated through the world, the Titans, all previously slumbering or in suspended animation, began to awake together. At Outpost 55 in Sedona, Arizona, the legs of the arachnid Titan, erupted from the ground in the oil field. At Outpost 67 in Munich, Germany, what was once thought to be a mountain burst to life, shaking off hundreds of tons of rubble as its white, massive eye opened. At Outpost 75 in the Southern, the facility was shaken by an unseen creature in a smoky haze. In the bunker a few thousand miles away, Emma and Jonah looked on as Monster Zero continued roaring from Rodan, appearing in the skies high above and circling like a hawk, waiting for the right moment to strike. I thought we were going to release them gradually, one at a time, Jonah said. Look at Emma out of the corner of his eyes. Emma, in response, shook her head in disbelief. I'm not the one doing this, she whispered back. Jonah looked at the monitor again, as Rodan, surprisingly, landed beneath Monster Zero and seemed to bow in submission. Long live the king, Jonah proclaimed, walking to his quarter as Emma stared in wonder and horror. Meanwhile, back on the Argo, Mark was seated at the computer, racking his brain, trying to figure out the Orga's main frequency which she had used to awaken Rodan Monster Zero. Any luck? Elaine asked from her computer just behind him. No. Whatever Emma used to create the Orca's signal, I never heard it before, he admitted. How are you doing now? He asked. She replied with something spoken in Mandarin. How's that? Marx asked. Myth is our compass, she translated. It is something my mom used to say. She believed our stories about monsters and dragons could help us find the Titans and restore our connection to nature. Wait, your mother? You're a second generation monarch? He asked. Third, she said with a smile. It runs in the family, she said, showing pictures of past generation, even those before monarch had formed. with each group having twin girls side by side. That's incredible. I didn't expect your family has any tip on slaying dragons, do they? He asked. Slaying dragons is a Western concept. In the East, they are sacred, divine creatures who brought wisdom, strength, even redemption, she said, still smiling and looking at him over her shoulder. He couldn't help but smile a little in return. Suddenly, she gasped and half stood up out of her chair. Whoa, what is it? Mark asked. She took a deep breath and slowly sat down. You okay? She asked. She nodded, holding a hand to silence him as she slowly closed her eyes. Meanwhile, back in China, where Mafra had cocooned herself beneath the waterfall, something was happening. Casa Bravo, this is Containment Team Masura. Do you read? Over. The pilot of a Monarch chopper asked. Anything? Came a voice in the camp. Dr. Brooks, we have lost contact with the Argo, Casa Bravo, and all the other containment sites. Another aide told him, Angkor Wat, Skull Island, Stone Mountain, and all the Titans. They're escaping. Dr. Brooks walked up and looked at the screen intently. Wait. It's it's him, he said, pointing to Monster Zero. He's the one doing this. They're responding to his call, he said. Suddenly, thunder clashed in the skies and the earth trembled beneath their feet. Hey, where's Dr. Ling? Brooks asked. She's outside, the aide replied. Coming out of the tent, Brooks scanned for Dr. Ling and spotted her at the edge of the containment barrier staring intently at the waterfall. Dr. Ling, we lost contact with Monarch. Dr. Ling? He called. She would not move. Back on the Argo, Eileen's eyelids fluttered slightly as Mark continued to wait patiently for whatever she wanted to say or do. Back in China, the cocoon, just barely visible behind the waterfall, began uttering a clicking sound as a soft blue glow began pulsing within. Brooks looked up, cleaning off his glasses, and the rest of the Monarch staff all gathered around the platform, watching the waterfall. And then, amidst the clicking and the pulsing light, a single long, sharp tendril emerged and stretched out forward out of the waterfall, accompanied by a soft screech. Electricity began going haywire as lights and devices started to short out. However, rather than panic, all the Monarch staff began to relax. They couldn't put their finger on why. They should be panicking right now. Running for cover, Monarch was about to hatch from a cocoon. A Titan was about to emerge from the waterfall and potentially attack the base, and yet they couldn't help but all remained calm and stared at the waterfall. Back on the Argo, Eileen's lips curled into a faint smile as the sound of the music entered her mind. But not just her mind. Everyone in the China containment facility could hear it. Soft tribal music, accompanied by soothing vocals of a beautiful melody, resonating within their bodies and putting their minds and souls alike at peace. A blue eye flashed from behind the water, and the form of a large insect began to emerge from the top of the cocoon behind the falls and crawl down towards the base. Her shadow, backlit by the light pulsing within the cocoon, which still held the majority of her emerging wings, crawled lower and lower towards them as the music swelled. Dr. Ling removed her hood, a perfect twin to her sister Eileen on the Argo, looked up in wonder as a tear of joy ran down her smiling face. She was the first in her family for potentially dozens of generations to actually see the beautiful form of Mofra in all her majestic glory, and as Mofra spreads her wings beneath the falls, illuminating them to the tip, she released a shriek and spread her front arm, announcing her arrival to the world.